Hello, everyone. Welcome back to The Victim's Voice. I am your host, Lori B. Today's case is out of Plymouth, Indiana. It's another case of a child who was failed by everyone who was supposed to protect her. This seems to be a common narrative in the true crime community, and hopefully one day something will be done to protect these kids from the real-life monsters around them. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump right in. Little Mercedes Lain was born on September 24th, 2020, to Kenneth Lain and Tiffany Coburn in Plymouth, Indiana. This little girl's life tragically ended in August of 2021 when she was just 11 months old. What happened to Mercedes, and where were the people who were supposed to protect her? This little girl was failed miserably by everyone. When the news of Mercedes going missing came out, so did other horrible secrets about the family. This is the story of Mercedes Lain. Kenneth Lain contacted the Plymouth Police Department on the afternoon of Sunday, August 15th, 2021, to file a missing persons report for his daughter, Mercedes Lain. A silver alert was issued that night, and the search for the little girl began. The difference between an amber alert and a silver alert are that silver alerts are for missing and endangered adults or children. They are much more common for missing people. In a few states, silver alerts are especially used for missing seniors. It was not until last year that the standards for silver alerts were expanded to include children. In both situations, these alerts must be issued by the police. The reason a silver alert was issued instead of an amber alert is that Tiffany and Kenneth claimed that they already knew who Mercedes was with. Also, according to court documents, before calling to report Mercedes missing, they had taken a duffel bag that contained narcotics to their neighbor's house because of priorities, right? On August 12th, 2021, Kenneth and Tiffany were at an Economy Inn on the northern edge of Plymouth, a motel known for drugs and prostitution. They were with Kenneth's 37-year-old cousin, Justin Miller. They decided they needed a break from the hard job of parenting and gave Mercedes to Justin to watch while they took their break. He was supposed to bring her back on the following day, that Friday, but it was later decided he would bring her back on Sunday. On Sunday, the parents contacted Miller and he told them that he had dropped Mercedes off with a lady at the hotel because Kenneth and Tiffany had not been home at the time. While searching for Mercedes, the police had trouble getting a hold of her parents. They would call and leave messages, but get no response. Court documents released show that Tiffany and Justin Miller both have prior methamphetamine charges. Authorities were not taking the missing child case lightly. The FBI Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team soon got involved in the case, and in the early morning hours of August 16th, they located Justin Miller. Plymouth Police Chief David Bacon said that Miller was located in Stark County with his Jeep at around 3 a.m., but Mercedes wasn't with him. He was taken into custody and charged with neglect of a dependent. Kenneth and Tiffany still weren't returning calls. It wasn't until 8:30 a.m. on August 16th that they were able to make contact with them to go over the timeline of events. Tiffany said she was waiting for her sister to pick her up to give her a ride to the station. She never showed up. Later, when police talked to Tiffany's sister, it was found out that she hadn't heard from Tiffany since earlier that morning at around 3 a.m. when she dropped them off after searching for Mercedes. Neither Kenneth nor Tiffany was showing any interest at all in finding their daughter. Police found Tiffany Coburn at the Economy Inn on the afternoon of Monday the 16th. Kenneth Lain was located at the Red Rock Inn around 6 p.m., also on the 16th. Both were taken into custody and charged with preliminary child neglect. Police learned during an interview that both Tiffany and Kenneth had been in contact with Miller via Facebook Messenger several times during the time the child was missing. Tiffany also admitted to using methamphetamine on multiple occasions, according to the probable cause affidavit. Meanwhile, Justin was telling the police a bullshit story. He said on Thursday, Kenneth contacted him about buying synthetic marijuana. During the conversation, Kenneth discussed the difficulty they were having with Mercedes, because it's really hard to deal with an 11-month-old, right? So Miller offered to take her for a few days, according to the probable cause affidavit. He then provided conflicting reports on what happened after that. Initially, he said he went to a McDonald's in Coons Lake and stayed at the Stark County residence of a friend for a few days. He then said he went to his girlfriend's home in Mishawaka, then went back to Stark County after he was kicked out of his girlfriend's house on Saturday, which would have been the 14th. Miller then dropped the child off with an unknown woman at the Economy Inn, according to the probable cause affidavit. Although he did not know the woman's name, Miller said he had seen her in Kenneth and Tiffany's room before. Miller thought this happened on Saturday afternoon. I just can't with these people. This isn't a dog you just leave with a random person to watch. This is a baby. The residents of the home in Stark County told police Miller showed up with the child on Friday the 13th and then he left. He returned on Sunday the 15th without the child. In the meantime, Mercedes' extended family was devastated as they continued their search for Mercedes. Angie Owens, Mercedes' grandma, told ABC 57, quote, "She's a happy little girl. She's crawling. She's energetic and she smiles a lot. I mean, she's our world. She's our grandchild. This is breaking my heart. I just don't know," end quote. Crime Online said that Angie Owens had called CPS several times to try to get Mercedes taken out of her parents' care, but nothing was ever done. She said Kenneth and Tiffany were not good parents and she knew that Mercedes was in danger with them and she felt helpless. On Tuesday, August 17th, the police held a press conference to ask for the public's help in the investigation. They told the public that Mercedes was last seen with Justin Lee Miller at the Economy Inn on Thursday evening. According to the FBI, however, she was last seen Saturday the 14th in Mishawaka at 12:30 a.m., but they did not release who last saw her or where she was at. Although we know from Justin's statement he had went there with Mercedes to visit his girlfriend on that day. Police also told the public that Mercedes' parents voluntarily handed Mercedes over to Justin as a babysitter and that he failed to return her within a certain time frame. They told the public that Justin was in custody, but the baby was still missing and that her parents had been arrested also. They said the three people in custody were giving conflicting information and that Coburn and Lain were not cooperating in the search for their little girl. So they were asking for the public's help in finding Mercedes. They asked for anyone who had contact or who had seen Miller, Kenneth Lain, or Tiffany Coburn within the last week to contact the police. They said Miller had been seen in Marshall. St. Joseph, and Stark counties over the last few days. They ended with a picture of Mercedes and described that she had last been seen wearing a white onesie with pink trim. They told people if they had any information to call Crime Stoppers and remain anonymous. They said there was a reward for possible information leading to Mercedes. Almost 5 days after she was last seen, Mercedes was still missing. Her aunt Stacy Milton spoke with media and released this statement. Quote, "Please bring her home or take her somewhere where she can be brought home. Please, we're asking for your guys' help. She loved and she's very loved. We want her home." End quote. On Wednesday afternoon, the family's worst fears were confirmed. Miller finally told police that on August 14th, he was at a residence in Mishawaka and when he woke up, Mercedes was deceased. He told officers he took her body to Stark County and left it there. Miller took officers to 1025 East 50 North in Stark County, and Mercedes' body was located in a wooded area. Nelson Chipman, the prosecutor, said the location of the victim was not visible from the street. He also said Miller's charges were going to be changed to neglect of dependent resulting in death. And if this wasn't enough to make your blood boil, Miller had used an old toilet seat to mark the shallow grave he had dug for little Mercedes. An autopsy was done, and it seemed Justin Miller's story wasn't adding up. He said he woke up and she was dead. However, the autopsy confirmed her cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, and the manner of death was ruled a homicide. The community was shaken by the discovery of Mercedes. So many people had been positive she would be found alive. People who had never met the little girl were coming together to grieve her. One community member who wished to be anonymous said, quote, "I'm sad, I'm disgusted, I'm heartbroken. My heart hurts so much for their family, I'm without words," end quote. Christy Schreiber lives a few blocks away from the wooded area where police say they found the body of 11-month-old Mercedes Lain. She moved to the area almost 3 years before and couldn't believe what she found on the morning 2 days after Mercedes was found when she got back home from dropping her granddaughter off at school. She said, quote, "Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something in the trees. So I went to look, and it was the baby's diaper bag. I found a piece of paper with the mom's name on it, so I immediately, obviously, called the police, and they had me come down with them to show them where it was at," end quote. The diaper bag was located not far from a roadside memorial made in Mercedes' honor at the intersection of 1025 East and 50 North outside of Knox. Marshall County resident David Jeffries has known all 3 suspects arrested in connection with Mercedes' death for approximately 15 years. He says Mercedes' babysitter Justin Miller was heavily involved with drugs in the past, which is why he chose to separate himself and hadn't talked to him in years. A vigil was held for Mercedes on August 21st at Centennial Park in Plymouth. During the vigil, Mercedes' grandmother, Angie Owens, spoke to the crowd thanking them for their support. A prayer was said in Mercedes' honor, and poems were shared by community members. Kenneth and Tiffany requested the court allow them to leave to attend Mercedes' funeral on August 25th, 2021. It was granted under the supervision of the Marshall County Sheriff's Department. The courts were having an issue on where the case against Miller should be tried. According to the South Bend Tribune, Mercedes was first reported missing from Marshall County. She was taken to and possibly died in St. Joseph County, and she was buried in Stark County. Indiana law states that a murder can be prosecuted in a county in which the cause of death is inflicted, the death occurs, or the body was found. Stark County prosecutor Leslie Baker had requested a special prosecutor for the case. Since she had been involved in cases with one or more of the defendants in the past, she wanted to avoid a conflict of interest. She hoped to get Nelson Chipman, who was the Marshall County prosecutor, to take the cases. Miller was first charged in Marshall County with child neglect resulting in death. Chipman dropped that charge to prevent the double jeopardy provision of it, since on August 30th, 2021, it was changed to a charge of murder in Stark County. In Indiana, the minimum for murder is 45 years. Stark County charged Miller as a habitual offender for 2 prior convictions of meth possession. This could lead to a stronger sentence. Miller had also been working on a plea deal, which Mercedes' Grandma Owens fought to get the court to reject. Tiffany Coburn and Kenneth Lain were charged with neglect. Their charges stayed the same even after Mercedes was found. The court did apply habitual offender status on Tiffany as well because of prior drug charges. In January 2022, Justin Miller was sentenced to 65 years for the death of Mercedes Lain. Tiffany Coburn and Kenneth Lain both received a 2.5-year sentence the next month in February of 2022. The disappearance and then finding of Mercedes also brought some skeletons out of the closet in regards to Kenneth's past. See, Mercedes was not the only daughter Kenneth had. On September 13th, 2021, after hearing about her sister's fate, Paige Hodge, formerly Paige Lain, went on to give an interview to ABC 57 News about her life with her father, Kenneth Lain, and his then wife, Mary Lain, Paige's mother. I'm going to read you some of that interview. Before Paige was even a teenager, she says she was forced to drink alcohol as young as age 8. She says it was any alcohol her parents could find. She was also forced to take drugs. She said, quote, "They got a kick out of watching us be, messed up," end quote. Hodge says she was forced into sexual encounters with an adult multiple times and even subjected to violence. "I've been punched in the face by Kenny," Paige Hodge said. All this happened by the time Hodge was just 12 years old in the home she lived with her biological parents. She said, quote, "I just remember not even thinking anything was going to be normal," end quote. It was just 7 years ago that Paige was living with her parents, Kenny and Mary Lain. She describes a nightmare that left her pregnant and in a foster home at the age of 13. Quote, "Adults aren't supposed to kiss you. They aren't supposed to touch you. They aren't supposed to do any of that," end quote, by Paige Hodge. On Christmas Eve in 2014, Knox police opened an investigation into what was going on inside the Lain household. Paige says, quote, "I found out that I was pregnant in November," end quote. According to the Knox police report, DNA samples were taken and police determined 20-year-old Angel Delapaz was the father. Delapaz was the cousin of one of Mary Lain's co-workers. Back in October of 2014, an arrangement was made between the Lains and Delapaz. Paige stated, quote, "In exchange for letting him live there and continue the relationship with me, he had set bills that he had to pay and set things that he had to give to Kenny and Mary, which were drugs," end quote. The Knox investigation confirms this, both in admissions from Mary Lain and from Cody Byrne, Mary's then boyfriend, who also lived with the family at the time. So Mary had her husband and her boyfriend living with them. Paige said, quote, "I had voiced what happened to both Mary, Kenny, and Cody, so all three of them. Mary's exact response was, 'You're going to continue to do it.'" Delapaz was even allowed by the Lanes to sleep in Paige's bed with her, and she was 12 years old at this time. The report says Kenny was questioned about Paige's pregnancy from a Stark County jail cell, where he was being held in February 2015 on a community corrections violation. At the time, he told investigators while he knew Paige was pregnant, he didn't know Delapaz, adding his daughter, quote, "wasn't with any adults," end quote. But Paige tells a different story, saying her parents even wanted her to get an abortion after it was discovered that she was pregnant. Paige stated, quote, "I didn't want to do that. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what that would be. I already didn't understand being pregnant," end quote. Eventually, Paige had the baby, a baby boy named Oakley, but they were separated when he was born. Kenny and Mary were later convicted of neglect in the Delapaz situation. Kenny was sentenced to 2 years behind bars, while Mary got 18 months probation. Delapaz was given an 8-year punishment, including 2 years of which was behind bars in prison. So Kenny and Delapaz did 2 years. Mary never set foot in jail for letting an adult have sex with their 12-year-old. The system is very screwed up. Paige was adopted by a new family when she was 16, and eventually she got her son back. At that park bench in Plymouth, Paige, now looking back, says she believes the Indiana Department of Child Services failed her and her 2 sisters. She says DCS should have removed them all from the home much sooner. Page stated, quote, multiple CPS cases were opened and then they'd just get closed. My little sister got a vacuum thrown at her. It hit her in the face. She had to go to the hospital and get it glued shut and everything. But when CPS got involved, they said they couldn't do anything because it didn't leave bruises. End quote. Paige remembers her parents lying to DCS to cover up the abuse and protect each other. After the nightmare ended for Paige, she refused to contact Kenny Lain for years. But she says she always worried his other kids might be suffering through the same situation. Then her half-sister Mercedes went missing. It began with a silver alert. The moment Paige saw it, she called Tiffany Coburn, Mercedes' mother. She called her on Sunday, August 15th at 11:36 p.m. Paige says Kenny Lain answered and she hung up, not wanting to talk to him, but then he called her back. She said, it seems like there's no way to avoid talking to Kenny if I wanted to figure out what happened. On the second phone call, Paige says Kenny told her that Justin Miller, who Paige knew growing up, and said of Miller she was surprised he would be involved in Mercedes' death, took Mercedes to babysit her on Thursday, August 12th. But Mercedes was supposed to be back for a birthday party the next day. She wasn't supposed to be gone any longer than that, Hodge says. The Marshall County Prosecutor's Office tells a story. Investigators believe Mercedes went with Miller on Friday because Kenny and Tiffany needed a break. Kenny also told Paige that he and Tiffany tried to find Miller and Mercedes when they didn't return as scheduled. But when Paige asked more questions, Kenny changed the subject and asked her how she was doing. She said it seemed to me like he didn't care at all. Paige hung up on Kenny, not wanting to talk to him. Police and investigators say it was difficult to reach and locate Kenny and Tiffany while 11-month-old Mercedes was missing. The morning of August 19th, at a news conference at the Marshall County Sheriff's Department, Marshall County Prosecutor Nelson Chipman said, it took some effort to find both of them. But Paige was quickly able to get a hold of them twice. Despite talking to Kenny while Mercedes was missing, Paige says she was never contacted by police or the FBI, who were also involved in the search for Mercedes. ABC 57 Investigates sat down with Paige to conduct the interview the day Mercedes' death was announced. Paige said, quote, I'm so mad right now, and it's probably why I haven't been able to cry, end quote. This would have never happened if they didn't leave their child in the care of somebody who went out of their way to hurt the child, end quote. But her anger isn't just with Kenny and Tiffany. Paige stated that DCS should be held to the same account. And as court proceedings against Lain, Coburn, and Miller began, the community and Paige thought that they might finally get some answers. Paige stated that her son and Mercedes looked alike. Paige and her sisters all experienced abuse at the hands of their parents. Paige says that abuse continued because of cracks in the system. Paige was adopted by a new family, the Hodges, on October 10, 2018. She says being adopted was life-changing, but getting there was a long journey. DCS didn't even remove her when they found out she was pregnant by someone over the age of 18. She says it took her parents, Kenny and Mary Lain, to fail a drug test for DCS to remove her and her two sisters from the home. The girls lived in 3 foster homes together before being separated. Paige was also separated from her son Oakley, the child fathered by the family friend Kenny and Mary Lain let live in their house with Paige when she was a child. Really, nobody wanted all 3 of us, all 4 of us, me, my sisters, and Oakley. said Page. But the 4 of them are just one example of the thousands of cases DCS is managing all at the same time. As of July 2021, DCS says it had 18,123 open cases, and of those, 11,377 children were in foster care. In Stark County, where Page's case was handled, DCS currently has 83 open cases. In Marshall County, where Mercedes died, DCS currently has 60 children in the system. According to the Indiana State Personnel Department, there are 2,292 family case managers at DCS, with 160 that are still in training. The number of case managers varies by county. In Stark County, DCS says there are 15, and in Marshall County, there are 13. In the state of Indiana, there's an average of 8 kids or families under monitoring per caseworker. But despite coming in under DCS standards, Page still says the system failed her and her family, and that failure extends to her half-sister Mercedes. She says, quote, "It definitely failed Mercedes, and it failed her family, and it failed her siblings." Back in July of 2021, DCS sent Kenny Lain and Tiffany Coburn notices that the agency would be conducting an investigation due to a report of neglect or abuse. It had 40 days from July 21st, the day the notices were issued, to complete the assessment. But 28 days later, Mercedes was dead. Mercedes' aunt, Stacy Milton, and grandmother, Angie Owens, agree DCS failed their family. Milton stated, quote, "They were called several times. They should have taken her out of that situation a long time ago." In fact, Milton and Owens say they've been calling DCS about Kenny and Tiffany's 3 kids since Tiffany was pregnant with the first one. Owens added she's called DCS multiple times about Mercedes alone. Owens said there was drugs in the home and that Tiffany was never clean. Milton talked about the state of the room at the hotel, which ABC 57 Investigates says they saw with their own eyes during their investigation. It was horrible. Rotten food, dirty dishes, and clothes everywhere. It wasn't fit for adults to live in, let alone children. Owens says she and others told Tiffany while she was pregnant with Mercedes that family in Indianapolis was willing to take her, but Tiffany wouldn't hear of it. Owens even says other people at the Economy Inn in Plymouth, where Kitty and Tiffany were staying, called DCS on them also. Milton stated, "It's just aggravating that they got so many calls and they failed every time. They had several chances to take her out of that environment, but they chose not to." Page says despite her past, it's made her stronger, and she wants others who have gone through the system to know they're not alone. She says DCS hasn't just failed us, it's failed a lot of other kids as well. Hodge, Milton, and Owens say they hope their tragedies inspire change to keep kids safe in the future. Page says her other sisters from Kenneth and Mary's relationship have moved out of state. DCS is set in place to help keep children safe, but they seem, in a lot of cases, to care more about the reunification process with biological parents than making sure these children have stable homes and are taken care of. It would be great if all children could be in the home with the biological parents, but sadly, that's not always the case. In most states, the caseworkers are overloaded with cases, so they aren't able to put the proper amount of attention on each and every case. Something needs to be done to fix the system that is in place to protect our children, and parents need to be held to stricter guidelines before their children are returned to them. There are so many families out there who want kids and can't have any, and would do anything to have a child to give their love to. Until something changes, I'm afraid we are going to keep seeing these cases, and it's sad and so preventable. That's it for today, guys. If you would like to recommend a case, you can go to A Victim's Voice on Facebook And next week we will have a new case. Thank you. Bye.